Welcome to the third location, Perek Ches Mishnah Aleph. Now the eighth Perek continues the theme of what we've been discussing till now, i.e. the shiurim that a person would be chayav for, that a person needs to carry in order to be chayav for hitzah on Shabbos. And now this Mishnah is going to list various liquids, how much liquid you have to carry on Shabbos in order to be chayav hitzah. So the Mishnah reads, Hamoitzi yayin, if a person carries wine, Kadei mazigas hakos, how much wine do you need to carry in order to be chayav hitzah on Shabbos? Kadei mazigas hakos, which explains to mean a koshel bracha, how much you need to dilute a koshel bracha. Now for a koshel bracha, you need a revius, you need a quarter of a lug of a kos, of a becha, for birchas hamazon, etc., etc. And the wine in those days was very strong. You'd have 1 part wine and 3 parts water. You'd have to dilute the wine. So for every glass of wine that a person would have, it would be 1/4 wine and 3/4 water. So therefore, to get to a revius of wine needed for a kosher bracha, you would actually have 1/16 wine, 1/16 of a revius of wine, plus 3/16 water, and together that would give a total of 1/4 of a revius of a lug of wine. Okay, so that is wine. Continues the Mishnah Cholov. How much milk do you have to carry in order to be chayav on Shabbos? Kadei gemir, that a person would need to swallow. And we're specifically talking about kosher milk, milk from a behemoth tahira, milk from a behemoth tameh. The Mishnah will discuss later on. So, how much milk do you have to carry in order to be chayav on Shabbos? Kadei gemir, that a regular person would swallow in one gulp, and that share is pachus from the revius halug. It's less than revius halug. It's actually, Tosfos gives an explanation that it's a cheekful, it's a mole lugmov, which is approximately a little bit more than half of a revius of a lug. So therefore, it's a smaller share, smaller amount of milk than you need than wine. Dvash, how much honey would you carry in order to be chayav on Shabbos? Dvash k'dei litin al hakotis, to put on a sore of an animal. Now, in those days, they would put a little bit of honey on a sore of an animal. When he's carrying a load or some sort of burden, it would cause some sort of abrasion, and therefore they would put some honey on it. Now, the difficulty is, of course, that dvash is a food, and you would eat food. So, why is it that we give a share for a refuah purpose rather than for an achila purpose? So the Bartanura explains that you've got a choice. Either you use nachila, which we know the shear is a gregaris, the dried fig, which mentioned in the previous Mishnah, or the shear is kadei litin alakotis, which is a very small amount that you'd actually put on the wounds of the animal. In fact, the Bartanura says it's even a small amount. On one pshat, the Bartanura says is makashal gabi asusim. That's the first pshat, and then he says umotsosi kosov sheshchin hayotze be'er habasa. We're talking about a boil that a person would have on his skin. When it sort of develops, the peak of the boil, the point of the boil, you put a drop of honey on there. So you only put a tiny amount on, according to that second pshat in the Bartanura. So why is it that you go after the smaller measure that you would need for refuah? So the Bartanura says, even though primarily dvash is there for food, since it is used for health purposes, and that is something which is a common usage of honey. It's not like a very outlandish, very extreme and unusual usage, but it's fairly common. V'hu mashu, and that's a small amount. As linan basa shiura zutra lechumra. We therefore go after the smaller share because we're machmir. We've got a choice. Do you go after the achili usage, and that will give you a gregaris, or do you go after the refuah usage, which is the masha who used either to put on the back of the animal or to put on the point of the boil on the skin of a person? And you go boss to the smaller share because that's that we're machmir. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Shemen, how much oil do you have to carry? Kadei losuch eiver cotton, to anoint literally a small limb. So the Bartanura explains that a small limb shall tinuk ben yom, of a very young child. V'hu etzba katana sheberegel, and it's the small finger, the small toe on his foot. So just a small amount of oil that you'd place on his small toe, that's how much you'd be chayav for. Rashi says it's referring to a small joint in the finger. Okay. mayim, how much water would you have to carry in order to be chayav on Shabbos? Kadei loshav bohem es hakilo, enough to rub on an eye plaster, like a patch a person would put on his eye, and he would put some water on that patch. That was part of his refuah. And again, like we said previously, with regard to dvash, we've got a choice. Really, water is used to drink, but since that it's also used for refuah purposes, we're going to use more machmir shiur and use the small amount that a person would put on his eye patch. He would specifically put water on his eye patch, not any other liquid, because other liquids would form some sort of crust over the eye patch, and that would impede his vision. So we specifically put water on it so it shouldn't impede his vision. Continues the Mishnah, Ushar kol hamashkin bervis. All other liquids would be, which is not, the Bartanur says, she'eino isin bohem refuah, i.e. all other liquids would be a revius. So orange juice, Coke, whatever it is, that would also be a revius. V'chol hashoifchin, and any wastewater which one would throw away, one would spill out, is also berevius. And the Bartanur says, "Ma'im suruchin v'chozul gavad bohem esatit." He would use it to add to make cement. So wastewater. So all of those shiurim would be berevius. Reb Shimon Omer. Reb Shimon argues with the Tanakama. He says, "Kulon berevius." All liquids are going to be measured. The shear for carrying on Shabbos is a revius. V'lo omru kol hashiurin halalu. And these shiurim were only said ela lematzni en, for those who hide them, who store them. In other words, we mentioned in the previous Mishnah that these shiurim, what if a person carries an amount which is smaller than the shiurim listed in our Mishnayos? So if a person carries a smaller amount, then everyone else who would carry that amount is potter. But the person himself who carries a smaller amount would in fact be chayav, because he is machshiv, he is elevated, he's given credibility and importance to that small amount. Reb Shimon argues. Reb Shimon says no. All the shiurim are revius. For people carrying, it's always a revius. What are these shiurim said for? These shiurim are said for the matzniah, the person who carries a smaller amount than a revius. He is only going to be chayiv if he carries a shear mentioned over here. So, for example, shemen kadei losoche yayin, kadei losoche v'katan, mayim to put on the eye patch, etc., etc., etc. So, Rav Shimon argues with the Tanakama and says all of these shiurim are only specifically said for the person who is matzniah, who wants to store a smaller amount, but otherwise the shear would be a revius. That is the end of Mishnah, the first Mishnah of Perek Ches.